Puts me so much trouble, it's not my fault. All this, I also lose my friends, I lost my baby. That is looking crack, only today want to change. He wanted us, so they couldn't try more like to feel. I'd kill the real, take your life in a second. The table drinks coffee in my kitchen, I mentioned. Eating every song, I just wanted to go away. You decide to stay in the well. I want to be forgiven, I don't like this kid for money. Sorry I was scared, you're not the way it feels. Like to sleep waiting for someone to come in and kill you. The final thing is that now I'm not afraid of anything. Cause they're gonna kill anyone that feels so powerful. They try by you every your skin of everything is confusing. You will be good, but you will be more. You will be good, but you will be more. You will be good, but you will be more. Alone every day, it is a praise of pleasure.
Good morning and welcome to Dynasty 365, where the film will set you free. Today we're going to be talking about the situation surrounding Marquise Brown and Miles Boykin of the Baltimore Ravens. And then we'll talk about how to adapt faster to the NFL landscape, and then some tips for your upcoming rookie draft. So Marquise Brown was drafted in the first round, which I think everyone is aware of, and Miles Boykin was in the third, I believe. Both are pretty fast, and Miles Boykin killed the combine in a lot of different ways. But the biggest concern I'm seeing with the situation in Baltimore is Lamar Jackson and his inaccuracy. So I scouted Lamar Jackson pretty heavily last year, and I do believe that the coaches were telling him to limit turnovers and not make risky throws that he definitely would at least attempt in college, and actually was pretty accurate. So I do believe with an off-season of NFL coaching and mechanics work, he will have improved accuracy this year. I actually like Lamar Jackson more than Kyler Murray as a prospect. One, for his play on the field, and two, Lamar Jackson doesn't have the option to quit and go play baseball at any point in time. I'm actually pretty surprised at how quickly everyone around the NFL, draft community, and dynasty community, one press release by Kyler Murray and his agent stating that he doesn't want to play baseball right before the NFL Combine, and believe it 100%. I think Murray has some of the same mechanical issues throwing as Lamar, and is much less built to handle NFL hits. So if I had the 1.01 in a Superflex, I would be trading that pick for Lamar Jackson plus whatever extra I could get. I'm honestly not even sure if that'd be possible. I'm not really up on the startup values right now, but I'd rather have Lamar than Murray going forward. So let's say you don't believe in Lamar Jackson and you don't think his accuracy or throwing ability will increase. And the popular narrative out there right now is that Baltimore is a run-first team, which is true. But I think it's going to be about impossible for the Ravens defense to not regress this season. They lost C.J. Mosley, who's one of, if not the best middle linebacker in the league. They also lost edge rusher Zadarius Smith to the Packers and Terrell Suggs to the Chiefs, if I remember right, and safety Eric Weddle, but they replaced Weddle with Earl Thomas, so that's probably a win in that department. But last year, their defense was third in the NFL in yards allowed per drive and second in points per drive, and I don't see how that's going to be possible this season. When the defense regresses, that typically means less favorable game scripts, which will lead to less runs and more throws. So just in that regard, the passing attempts are almost certain to go up, in my opinion. And I do have a strong belief that the accuracy of those passes is going to be much improved. Another good thing about the Ravens situation is that the run game will keep the offense on schedule. They were able to do that with Lamar Jackson and Gus Edwards last year, and now they have Mark Ingram, which is almost certainly more effective of a running back than Gus Edwards. They were already fourth in the NFL in time of possession per drive last season with just Gus Edwards and a regressing Alex Collins. I also believe they have decent touchdown scoring upside, as last year they would kick a lot more field goals because they had confidence in their defense, and that confidence probably won't be there this year. And they were number 1 in the NFL in offensive plays per game last year. Another concern I see with Marquise Brown getting paired up with Lamar Jackson is that with his height and Lamar Jackson's inaccuracy, he won't be able to hit him. And that's definitely possible, but you also have to look at the other side of the coin. Marquise Brown has a rare combination of speed and route running coming out of college. That's going to lead to easier throws with more separation for Lamar, and I've seen a trend with him where he doesn't really miss too many wide open throws on downfield shots, at least in college. I can't really speak much for last season because there wasn't a big sample size and the receivers really weren't all too great. I do kind of find it odd that they would let John Brown go in free agency and then replace him with a very similar sized player. So while there may not be as many passing opportunities as most other teams in the NFL, there are reasons to believe that those passing chances are going to increase. And with the Ravens' run-first offense, it actually leads to good play action. Combine that with Lamar Jackson's scrambling ability and his arm strength, and Marquise Brown's route running and speed, and that leads to a higher probability of big plays. A concern about Marquise Brown, my biggest concern, is the Lisfranc injury combined with him having the lowest weight divided by height of any receiver in the class. I have a feeling many are going to forget the lessons of John Ross, but even with John Ross, we actually had combine measurables, however inaccurate they may be, to back up the play speed on film. Now, Marquise Brown is fast enough on film where I'm really not concerned about his speed, but the fact that I don't have a time for him, and he's coming off of a Lisfranc, and he has that weight divided by height abnormally low score, is very concerning. Another thing to keep in mind are what traits do the NFL value? Well, they've shown they value speed at the receiver position above pretty much everything else the last few years. So when you see someone this small and this fast, the first round draft capital argument, when he's taken at the back of the first, is a pretty weak argument in my opinion. It is a good historical indicator of success, so it's not the worst thing in the world. But let's not act like NFL teams are infallible when it comes to their draft picks, especially at wide receiver. A narrative I hear thrown around a lot, which I don't think has much logical basis, it has some, but not a lot, especially at wide receiver, is that they took him in the first round. That means the injury will be healed by the season, and they have a plan to use him year 1. Based on the difference between what the film shows in the pre-draft rankings and the order that these receivers went in the NFL draft, leads me to conclude that the NFL values speed and long-term potential more than immediate production at the wide receiver position. I don't really think that argument is not valid. So there are some good things about the situation and some concerning things with the player himself, but you do have to take that long-term potential and speed into account with what the NFL draft told us by investing a first-round pick into him. He's another player where, similar to Debo, he's definitely moving up my board because of the first-round investment, and I'm actually probably higher on his situation than most of the Dynasty community for the reasons already stated. But as I've said multiple times, I'm looking for production in the first round where Marquise is probably going to go. But if he does fall to a spot where I'm comfortable taking him, I wouldn't be mad at it. But I'm not expecting it to pay off for a year or two. And I also expect him to have a very boom-bust profile when you look at the box scores when he is producing. So now let's transition over to Miles Boykin. Miles Boykin did kill a combine. He was held back by quarterback play at Notre Dame in his last year, but he does have some areas to improve upon. The 3 biggest areas I see is he shows a surprising lack of physicality in his routes. He gets pushed to the boundary and out of bounds a lot. Now with his bench at the combine, it kind of shows that he's not as strong for his size as you would like to see. But he is a good blocker and he does show functional strength on the football field, so that could be corrected. His route running really isn't all that good right now. It's decent, but he doesn't really have much refinement. He does have great releases and varied releases, which is good for immediate production, but he still rounds a lot of routes. And another thing I find odd is he rarely high-point hands catches, and he's not as good in contested catch situations as I'd like to see right now. He does have great hands. He does catch a lot of stuff, but at 6'4", I want to see him increase his advantage with his height even more by getting better at boxing out and high-pointing the ball with his hands away from his body. To me, it's not really a question that Marquise Brown is more pro-ready when it comes to the technical aspects of playing wide receiver, but Boykin does have a lot of height and weight on him and blocking ability, which could help him see the field year one in that offense where they're trying to run the ball. As we just went over talking about Marquise Brown, he does have Liz Frank and size concerns, which could lead to Boykin having the best shot at seeing meaningful time of these two receivers in year one. And clearly, the wide receiver receiving landscape isn't much to write home about right now. Willie Snead is more of a slot guy, and while he is a pretty underrated player, he's limited athletically and will probably never be a high-volume target. Mark Andrews is a good receiving tight end, so he will see some work this year, especially if he can improve as a blocker. He can see more snaps, and they can run more play action with him. Hayden Hurst is decent, but is looking like kind of a reach right now after 1 year in the NFL, and they still have Nick Boyle, I believe, for blocking duties, so he's probably the odd man out in that tight end area. Jordan Lasley is a high upside player, but with character concerns, so I'm really not too worried about him this year, but we'll see once the preseason hits. Chris Moore is just a guy. Jaleel Scott is super raw, and I do not think highly of him at all as a prospect. And Seth Roberts is another Jag who plays the slot with Willie Snead. So there is a sizable chance that your week one starting X wide receiver for the Ravens is Miles Boykin. I'm not saying that Miles Boykin is better than Marquise Brown. I actually was far lower on him until my writer urged me to take another look at the film, which I did, and I saw how I could have been judging him a little too harshly for some of his technical issues. If you've heard any of the wide receiver film note breakdowns, you know how much I love my blockers, and he is one of the better blocking wide receivers in this class, so I think he could see a lot more snaps than people are thinking. So purely for the price, I don't think anyone is projecting Miles Boykin to go in the first round, but a lot of people are Marquise Brown. I would much rather trade down from the first and acquire some draft capital and veteran players to acquire Miles Boykin, where I can probably get him in the late second, early third, maybe even later, because of the recency bias from people watching the Ravens offense last year and placing an over-reliance on Marquise Brown's first-round draft capital. Next, we're going to talk about letting go of the past when it comes to your dynasty evaluations. I firmly believe the best way to win your dynasty league is to adapt faster than the rest of your league to the current landscape of the NFL. The 3 ways I try to do this is by watching the film, listening to podcasts, hint hint, and checking my bias. The first question I ask myself is this a fluke or a trend? The number one piece of advice I would give people in Dynasty or Fantasy is that no one game is as good as it looks or as bad as it looks. That goes for an individual player and for the team. If you're looking at the point total to see which teams are better than the others, you're doing it wrong. Scoring plays are the rarest, lowest probability plays throughout a football game. Now, many things do lead up to that, but fluke plays can easily influence the box score. Watching the film will allow you to learn the context, the surrounding events that led up to the score, the yardage total, the fantasy point total for your player and your team. Was a key player injured early in the game? Were there too many injuries in a specific unit for the offense or defense to play in the way they normally do? Was it just an off day by the team at large? It was an away game in a different time zone and they didn't show up to play? Or there was a long stoppage or rain delay. Usually one team responds better than the other, and that emotional change can affect that game. Were the two teams just a poor matchup? Different teams have different styles of play, and they do match up better or worse with different teams. My example will be the 49ers playing the Denver Broncos last year. I knew for a near certainty that the Broncos were going to lose that game, and the offensive weapons for San Francisco were going to have great days. Now, it is easier to see those things when you're watching your specific team, but to win at fantasy, I truly believe you have to watch all of the games. You have to understand the current state of the league and the changes week to week that could affect the next game. So I'm pretty sure we had 1 or 2 safety injuries going into that game, and our safeties already couldn't cover any tight end in the league. Well, now you're going up against George Kittle, who is a yak monster and a great route runner and just an overall complete tight end. I also think Chris Harris was lost to a broken leg that week. I could be wrong. I can't quite remember, but I knew that garbage-ass Isaac Yiadom was going to be playing a lot of corner reps, and based on his college film and how he made every rookie wide receiver that he went up against in the preseason look like a seasoned veteran, I knew Pettis was going to have a big day. He had already had a few weeks of good production, but I was just almost certain that Shanahan was going to find a way to get Pettis on Yiadom and take advantage, which he did. We also lost Emmanuel Sanders to an Achilles tear late in the week, so it was a perfect storm. I'm not trying to say that I'm some genius for realizing that 3 injuries to the team I follow closely was going to have a bad week. But we were just coming off a win against the Bengals on the road, who had a much better record than, I believe there was a 2-14 or 2-12 or 2-10, 2-12, I can't remember, 49ers. The Bengals was being called such a trap game that everyone knew about it, and we got the W. Well, the real trap game happened next week against a 2-and-whatever squad. Without Sanders, Case Keenum had no one he could trust, and the 49ers defense, who was below average, could stack the box to stop Lindsey. So that's the injuries part of the context, which by following the news you could probably know, but only by watching the film could you understand how impactful those players were to the team. The Niners also have a pretty stout defensive line, and our offensive line was showing signs of wear with people getting injured and coming out of the game too often. I can't remember if Paradis went down yet or not. I don't think he did. I just think our offensive line wasn't looking too good against the Bengals because they were a really bad run defense, and it was pretty hard for them to open holes in that game. Lindsey just broke off a few long runs. And then there's also the coaching advantage. So we had the injuries, we had the poor matchup with a good D-line versus wearing down offensive line who had been playing very well, and now we've got the off day. The coaching difference between Vance Joseph and Kyle Shanahan could not be more astronomical. I know I sound like I'm coming down hard on Joseph, but he should have been fired year 1, halfway through the season at the latest. The Broncos were absolutely unprepared for George Kittle, who had been leading the NFL in receiving yards, I believe, and literally the only offensive weapon until Pettis started to emerge after Breida got hurt 2 weeks before. And still, the Broncos came out flat in a game that had playoff implications against a team with 2 wins and a coach that was the son of a former Broncos head coach. Now, I use that game as an example, but the same principles apply to players, offensive systems, position groups. You want to be looking for the context. And with the availability of Game Pass for a pretty reasonable price, in my opinion, you can be looking for injury context, you can be looking for poor matchups, and you can be looking for trends over a few weeks, like Dante Pettis rising up, instead of making your assumptions based off only the box score, only the fantasy totals, and only the statistics. So specifically for Dynasty, one of the best ways to find value, if you can adapt quickly, is when a narrative changes too far in the other direction. When I say narrative, I mean something that is hearsay, inadmissible in a court of law, not founded in logic, or what a scientist would consider objective evidence, like coach speak. Something as simple as Matt Nagy calling David Montgomery a 3-down back is going to increase his draft price in rookie drafts. If you weren't playing Dynasty last year, or weren't paying attention to the news, Matt Nagy said the same thing about Jordan Howard probably 15-20 times. Why am I going to believe what Matt Nagy says? I'm also seeing articles speculating that Tariq Cohen's carries are going to go down. All based on a rookie who I honestly didn't like his film too much, that hasn't even played an NFL snap yet, compared to Tariq Cohen, who is one of the more electrifying players in the league and has a chance to score on every play. I would be using these 2 pieces of narrative to see if the Cohen owner in my league is wavering a little bit. If the narrative is swinging too far one direction, that's a market imbalance and an opportunity for a long-term winning trade for you. Ask yourself, is this narrative even real? What does the film say? If it's something like coach speak, where there's no film, what's the historical precedent? Well, Nagy's already talked up running backs before, and it didn't work out. So do I trust the coach, who probably wants the rookie to feel at home? Or do I trust past evidence? And for the Tariq Cohen narrative, there's no film for that, right? Just like with the coach speak. But is it real? Is it real and is it likely? If it's a rumor from an unnamed source, it probably isn't real. When Tariq Cohen has shown great skill as a pass catcher and good enough vision and toughness as a ball carrier to earn some touches, I find it unlikely that they're going to go down based on no evidence whatsoever. Find things like this, ask yourself those questions, and if you can adapt faster, you can probably win a trade. That also kind of ties in with don't overreact to the present. Same principle as no one game is as good or as bad as you think it is, even watching the film. Remember that we're making long-term, long-lasting decisions here. Is one data point really enough to change your previous perception of what this player was going to do in the NFL? Sometimes it is. Sometimes the evidence is irrefutable. But more often than not, something is a fluke rather than a trend. Ask yourself, is it the player or is it the situation? Did the offensive line lose its 3 best linemen, or can the player not see the open hole right in front of his face? If it is the situation, ask yourself, when will that situation change? Or can it even change? If those 3 linemen are lost for the season, it might be a good time to consider trading away that player for someone that can help you win now. You can use this principle when evaluating the draft capital spent on a prospect as well. We'll use the example from earlier, Marquise Brown. Was it spent on his current skill or his future projection and rare traits? Well, he definitely is skilled. It's definitely spent on his rare traits, namely route running and speed. First-round draft capital doesn't mean he's playing year 1. It means he has some combination of current skill, future projection, or rare traits. Let's move on to why the Dynasty community is so active right now, and that's the rookie draft coming up in your league sometime this summer. One tip that is insanely helpful is to create an Excel spreadsheet, or if you're not very technically savvy, a piece of paper will do just fine, with your rookie draft order, the current team in that spot, and a list of their positional needs. If you're so new to Dynasty that you're not quite sure what their needs are, go use an average draft position resource on the internet and evaluate their team to see which areas have the lowest average draft position as a whole. So after you do this, you need to be aware that teams will move up and move down throughout the draft, right? That's part of what makes the rookie draft so fun and exciting, is all the different movement and strategies you can try out and execute. If you do have a target in mind because of a positional need, look on that sheet that you just made and trade up to either the pick in front of that team while that team is on the clock, or before the draft, trade up 2 or 3 spots higher than that team, depending on which owner is going to give you a better deal on that pick. When the Broncos drafted Paxton Lynch, I knew nothing about film scouting or analysis, really, outside of watching a few games and highlights, but I really didn't take it seriously at the time, so I was all in on Lynch. I was trying as hard as possible to trade up in my rookie draft so that I could get the Broncos quarterback of the future. Well, there's about 4 teams in a row that would not budge. Their asking prices were insane. They were targeting different players, but I was just determined I needed Paxton Lynch. So I kept going up the order and found a guy that sold me the pick at a lower price, about 60% of the price of the team 5 spots down in the order. It's better to be trying to move up with multiple people than it is just one. Find that best value. All people are going to value rookie picks differently. Most are going to overvalue them in my experience. But if you are trying to trade up, you can usually find someone willing to trade down. And on that Excel spreadsheet or piece of paper, decrease the order of the need. So say a team needs running backs and tight ends. They really need running backs and they kind of need a tight end. If they draft a running back in the first, don't cross off running back as a need, but move it down behind tight end, or move it equal to tight end. Many owners will overdraft a position, especially if it's very weak, to try to fix it this season. Remember to win the draft, not the trade. Remember, this is long-term, big-picture thinking in Dynasty. If you trade up and lose on value, it doesn't matter if the guy you targeted hits. If you aren't getting any good offers when you're trying to trade down, so you accept less than value, but you have a target in mind and you hit on that pick, it doesn't matter that based on the trade calculator, you lost the trade. Win the draft, not the trade. One of the hardest things to manage is impatience when you're on the clock in a rookie draft, or when your pick is coming up and you're sure there's just no way that guy is going to fall to you. You think everyone else sees what you see. Trust the average draft position. Most people are more worried about the league agreeing with them making a good pick, quote unquote, relative to ADP than they are getting their guy. It's a lot easier to do when you're in more than one league, but trust the ADP within a few picks. But also try to be aware of good owners and trade up in front of them if you have a specific target in mind. So let's say you're on the clock and you're all in on TJ Hawkinson. Well, he just got picked right in front of you. A team traded up, they sniped you, and now you're not sure who to pick. Do you take Noah Fant? Do you switch to a running back, which you also need because most teams have multiple needs or multiple areas in which they could improve? Don't make a panic pick where you draft someone trying to give off the illusion that that was your intended target all along. There's no shame in trading down and out of the pick. Long term, it's almost always the right call, and it's better to trade down to get a guy you know more about than make a pick you're not totally confident in. Hope you gained some good information from the podcast today. The happy song of the day is The General by Dispatch, and the link is in the episode description. And the football song of the day is We as Americans by Eminem. If you've got any feedback for this episode, parts that you liked, parts that you didn't like, things that made sense to you, things you didn't understand, things you completely disagree with, reach out to me on one of the social media networks. I'm not very social media savvy at the moment, but in order for this podcast to be a success, I have to get better. And the way you get better is through practice. If you think I've provided value or thought-provoking ideas that you'd like to see continued, please consider supporting me on Patreon at any dollar amount. At $5, you'll reach the paid content tier, which I believe will help you adapt quicker to the landscape of your rookie draft. This wasn't some get-rich-quick scheme. I've been planning this for a long time. I've come up with a strategy, but like with all things, you need feedback, and then you can learn and adapt to the new reality and make better decisions. My paid content is not up to my standards right now. I think there's some great info in there and useful things in there for sure, but I've been more focused on creating this content, learning how to do all the things associated with a podcast more than the paid content, which I knew would take a long time and a track history to cultivate. But I do believe in it, and my next goal over the upcoming months, hopefully before the season, I'm really hoping before the season I can get this done, is the trade calculator. It's going to have a ton of settings on it that I think will make it very adaptable to all leagues. And it's going to be updated very frequently, which again will help you adapt faster to your league and the current reality of the NFL landscape. But if you just want to keep listening to the podcast, I'm more than happy to keep making it. I know this is a long-term goal. The paid content is designed as a time saver and quick adaptation tool, and I do have saved copies of all my work that are untouched so that at a later date I can retroactively reveal my ranks and all that stuff so that there is a historical record. But anyways, later this afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern, the second half of the Tier 3 wide receiver film note breakdown will be out. The wide receivers covered will be Speed Demon Emmanuel Hall, huge target, Jazz Ferguson, route running specialist Keelan Doss, complete but athletically worrying Keyshawn Johnson, Marquise Brown and Miles Boykin, and the Bengals' new Husker, Stanley Morgan Jr. You've been listening to Dynasty 365, where the film will set you free.
So much trouble, it's not my fault. All this I also lose my friends, I lost my baby that was looking crack. Only today want to change. He wanted us on the cougar to try what I to feel. I'd kill the real, take your life in a second. The devil drinks coffee in my kitchen, I mentioned in every song, I just wanted to go away. You decide to stay in the well. I want to be forgiven, I don't like this kid for money. Sorry, I was scared, you're not the way it feels. Like to sleep waiting for someone to come in and kill you. The final thing is that now I'm not afraid of anything. Go they gonna kill anyone that feels so powerful. They trip out you and your skin up, everything is confusing. You will be good, but you will be more. You will be good, but you will be